The World Health Organization, and something we have warned about on this show year in, year out, and being ridiculed and denigrated for it, the Global Pandemic Treaty of the WHO. Liberal Senator Alex Antic joins us. Alex, great to see you. A one-man band fighting for the freedom of this nation you are against the overreach and the threat of a global pandemic treaty by the World Health Organization. Now, this week we had, or last week, the World Health Assembly, which is kind of where they all get together to push this agenda. Tell us about it, Alex. What's going on?
Yeah, well, I don't know about a one-man band, Rowan. I got the harmonica and the drums going and the cymbals going, but I wouldn't think it's quite as bad as that. There are a few of us, Senator Gerard Rennick and Senator Ralph Babbitt and Senator Matt Canavan, of course, as always, is on point. So there are a few, but this is worrying stuff. It's worrying that it's not making more news outside great shows like yours. The mainstream media don't want to hear about this. And while we're distracted with nonsense like The Voice or whatever other issues of the day permeate the Canberra political elite, we are now seeing this going on in the background. And what we're seeing now is these amendments to the international health regulations. There was a suite of them, a tranche of them back in May of last year, which are about to come into effect. There's a 24 to 12-month period where they are adopted. And in the background to that, there are another 307 that are being negotiated by this working group on the international health regulations, which is, by the way, made up of a group of unelected bureaucrats from all over the globe. And then if that isn't worse, and it's not clear why both are needed, but in addition to those two working documents, there's also the pandemic treaty, which is a bigger, badder instrument. I got corrected during estimates. I called it a treaty. Turns out it's an instrument. Turns out they're exactly the same thing. So people have thought you'd get weasel words at Senate estimates. I mean, it's like going to Harvard Business School, except for bureaucrats. But anyway, I digress. I chase off into the distance there and lose my train. But it is frustrating because this is a massive issue. This really represents basically a global health autocracy brewing in our own midst, of global surveillance, digital health passes, and basically the Australian pandemic response sitting in lockstep with those that created the COVID lockdown hysteria in the first place. I mean, I just think this is huge news. It's just not being told while we're all worried about bread and circuses here in this country.
James.
Well, Alex, I want to ask you about this global pandemic treaty because, I mean, as you were saying, it does have all of these potential powers. They're still working on what they are. Australia had a pandemic response that was completely different to what it wound up doing. But, in the books, Tony Abbott worked on it when he was health minister about what might happen. Yet it was the Morrison government, the Liberal government, that started the process of Australia getting into this treaty in the first place. So the Liberals have to answer some questions about this, don't they?
Well, I think honestly, I think this is a political issue on both sides. I don't think that perhaps the Australian political class has understood the big and bad nature of the bureaucracy they're dealing with. And I think there are probably many of us who 20 years ago would have thought, oh, yeah, the World Health Organization, they do good stuff, whatever. Well, those days are over. I mean, this is not a good organisation. This is an organisation we should be leaving. We should be leaving yesterday. Yep. And if you want to know why, have a look at their response in the COVID pandemic. They didn't get anything right. First it was no masks, then it was masks. First it was no pandemic, then they declare a pandemic. Almost everything was wrong, and almost everything was locked in step with the CCP approach to the pandemic. So we just adopted that. And my fear is that Australia is on the path, if it's not already there, to becoming a simple vassal state of a global medical bureaucratic elite that are going to tell us how to do our own thing in the coming years. And if that doesn't frighten people, let's have a think back to what we saw in Melbourne and other parts of the country over the last 2 or 3 years. We do not want this, and people need to understand what's going on.
But surely the World Health Organization, as you've said, throughout the pandemic, its mishandling was profound from start to finish. And now North Korea has been admitted, a country that starves its own people, sends entire families to labour camps. How can we possibly be trusting this organisation now that we know just how completely shambolic it is and how harmful it can be? Like, how's the Liberal Party not recognising this, let alone Labor?
Well, look, I mean, I think there are portions of the party that are, and I'd like to see more. I think part of the problem is that people are distracted. Literally, as I said, the bread and circuses of politics is taking our focus off what is the most important issue. And you're quite right. These are almost comedy acts of hilarity. We've got, the UN Human Rights Council that's got such human rights heavyweights as Venezuela and Saudi Arabia sitting on its advisory panel. I mean, the UN has become almost so comical that they should start their own Adelaide Fringe Act next year. It's almost parody. It's like a Babylon Bee skit now. It's so ridiculous. But look, that's the nature of global politics now. It's almost like this is being slipped under the carpet. People won't hear about it, they won't talk about it. When you raise it in Senate estimates like I did during the week, you get told, oh no, there was nothing to see here, it's all fine, trust us. It won't become binding on Australia, and of course it will. Once these regulations are adopted, they simply have to pass through the Parliament here in Australia. And how hard do you reckon that's going to be? It'll pass through in a breeze.
And also, Alex,
these things are real.
You made the point, Alex, that we sign up to these treaties. Once we've signed up to them, that becomes the justification for whatever it is. So governments go, yeah, we're doing this because we had to sign the treaty. And you made that point during the week. So let's just explain to people very clearly, because there's a lot of misinformation around this. I remember last year, just before the May election, in The Spectator, we ran an article saying that Australia was about to sign up to the global pandemic treaty. Scott Morrison, within an hour, was on 2GB saying this is a pack of lies, it's conspiracy theory, it's not true, etc., etc., etc. And the reality is, which was misinformation on his part to a degree, because the reality is there are various instruments, as you say, there are various levels, there's amendments going through. Every May, there's this World Health Assembly, which is different to the World Health Organization, but it's a subpart of it, a subset of it. They make these little amendments, things get signed, things get changed, then there's this bit over here and that bit over there. It's very deliberately kind of obscure, very bureaucratic, lots of different, so no one quite knows what's going on. So explain to us, the fear is, now whether this is the reality, but the fear is that in the most extreme cases, if all these amendments go through and if everyone signs up to them, that you would have the World Health Organization being able to declare that a pandemic or an illness has happened in such and such a place, and the World Health Organization deciding a lockdown must take place in that area. That's the fear. Now, governments, politicians say, no, that would never happen. But that is the fear, correct?
Yeah, you've nailed it, Rowan. Yeah, that's exactly right. And, of course, the argument against this is, well, if it's not going to become binding and it's not so drastic and it's not so important, then why are we doing it? Why are we even involved? Why are we one of these 197 member states that's just whistling Dixie on this, so to speak? It doesn't make any sense, and you're absolutely right. Once these things are enforced, they then can be used as hooks for the external affairs powers to create local laws as well. So it's just not right to say that this won't be binding on Australia. There are multi-levels of why these will be binding. The international health regulations, once amended and then ratified by the Australian Parliament, do become binding. And then in addition to that, any new treaty obligations become an opportunity for the Australian Parliament to legislate in its own right. So, I'm not saying this is the case, but we may well see the, World Health Organization Power Shift Bill of 2024, which is tied to the external affairs power under the pandemic treaty. Yeah, I'm being facetious, but
yes,
those are the sorts of things
that happen under cover of darkness, James.
So,
yeah.
Alex, just want to ask you finally, do you find it disturbing that there's so much more enthusiasm, not just in Australia, but globally, for a WHO treaty that could control how countries respond to pandemics, which, of course, are being told, could come again, more and more of them. We're always told this. And yet there's no real global push for a ban on the gain of function research that is increasingly believed to have been behind the coronavirus pandemic, and that is believed to have been partially funded, at least, by Anthony Fauci's National Institutes of Health.
Well, James, you're spot on. I mean, if you're really being serious about a global health, perspective, or whatever the, words that are being used in the WHO's memos on this is, that you'd think that would be the starting point. The function which actually potentially started the entire pandemic should be front and centre. But I think this bells the cat on what we're dealing with the World Health Organization here. We're not really dealing with this. Is about power and control and surveillance ultimately, and they will be saying that is dressed up as a streamlined approach. But I reckon Australia's health framework should be left to do its own thing, to make its own decisions, and to not get lockstep with a global unelected bureaucratic elite, which is where we're headed.
Now, Alex, just quickly before you go, next time you're in Senate estimates, I have here a bunch of garlics and garlic cloves, genuine. I would like you to ask Brendan Murphy if he can explain whether we could have avoided all of COVID if we just had more garlic, which is what the latest news we saw in the Financial Review, Alex.
I think you're. That's somewhat alarming that you're being facetious, and that's a question I actually did pose to Paul Kelly, Professor Paul Kelly, who's the Chief Health Officer. I actually did ask him that question because, and we wish him well. He does have COVID at the moment, but I of course, pointed out that, of course, the vaccines were working well. Which I was shot down for, but throw a bit of garlic at it, guys. So that's what the Doherty Institute now says. And if we'd only known garlic would fix it, we could have all gone home in 2021. How about that?
Exactly. Alex Antic, great to see you as always. Keep up the great work there in Parliament with your colleagues there.